Jane Poole-Wilson, MLC, is joining us to talk about her time in the job. Of course, you did have that 9 months extra before the last elections.
Yeah.
So you had a chance to settle in, I suppose?
Yes.
And then all these other girls come in?
Yes.
How's it been for the last year?
Well, personally, I think it's really going well. I'm still very much enjoying the role. I feel there's good energy, actually, and good team spirit in the Legislative Council, so I'm really enjoying it.
Because you have seen the old sort of setup, the new.
Yeah.
Did it really make a big difference?
It's difficult for me because 9 months, it sounds like a long time. It isn't that long, but I suppose from my perspective, it's nice to have been there and then to be able to kind of carry on. But having new people in, I think in any organisation, it can be very refreshing and energising to have new people. And I think actually you could see that almost with the previous Keys election. If you get quite a turnover of people, you're going to see some change and you're definitely going to get energy.
What do you bring to the party?
Well, I'm doing lots of things, which is great. So I carried on with my equality champion role, which I'm really enjoying.
Explain that, exactly what that means.
So I talked about this at the time of the last election. I think it's innovative. It's a bit like the children's champion role, I suppose, in that it has a very discrete focus around trying to champion our equality legislation. But
equality for men and women, or equality for everybody?
Equality across the... So there are a number of protected characteristics under our Equality Act. So gender is one of them, but sexual orientation, disability, age, there are a number of defined protected characteristics. But I think going above and beyond the legislation, because the legislation is kind of your basic requirement, I would argue, and going beyond that, if you look at the Programme for Government strategic objective of promoting an inclusive and caring society, what matters to me, I think, and I think probably broadly in Tynwald, is that we make sure that what we're doing is helping to really promote inclusivity.
But are we there?
Oh, no. And actually, I think, let's be very realistic here. The UK, on their Equality Act 2010, our legislation is largely derived from that, not wholly, but largely. They still have numerous challenges and issues. And one of the interesting things that we've done, we've got a great government equality advisor, Dawn Kinnish, and we've built some really interesting links with different organisations in the UK to find out what their challenges are, how they've addressed things, to see what we can translate and use in the Isle of Man. Right. So I think the other thing is society changes all of the time, and when we talk about equality and inclusion, we're always measuring ourselves against a sort of changing expectation, if you like. And one good example of that is if you look at disabled access toilets. Recently in the media, there's been more talk about the importance of making those bigger, of putting even better equipment. Children who grow into young adults who need another adult and some real support to access using the toilet facilities when they're out and about. They shouldn't be lying on the floor. If you put in proper hoists and facilities, that enables their dignity and for people to go out and live a more fulfilling life, knowing they can access the right facilities when they're out. So our expectations move as well, I think.
So this is keeping you busy, but you're not on any departments, right? Is that
correct? Yes, now, I'm not in a department.
That means your pay structure is different, and is it because of that?
I received the
basic.
Yeah.
Your idea, not been asked. I mean, where are we?
I mean, I was enjoying a number of things I was doing before, so I've become chair of the Justice Committee, and fortunately, I've been able to carry on the Constitutional, Legal Affairs and Justice Committee, which is one of our policy scrutiny committees. Now, that knocks you out of being in, for example, the Department of Home Affairs or the Cabinet Office, because they're probably the two prime departments that are being scrutinised. I was already a trustee of St Christopher's Isle of Man, which currently does work around supporting looked after young people. You can't then be in the Department of Health and Social Care because that's, or even the Department of Education. So in my particular situation, there are a number of things that I was already doing, or whether in Tynwald or outside, that made going into a department.
Well, there are other ones, though. I mean,
there are.
Would you go if you're asked?
Well, again, my personal view is that we do need to get the balance right in Tynwald between how many people are in the executive and how many people are.
You're only one of three.
I'm one of three. Yes.
It's not that brilliant, is it?
My view is we could improve that balance. I also think there comes a point where you can't do everything well. So if you take on too many responsibilities, you're not going to be able to give the adequate time and attention.
But would you if you asked?
If it was the right thing that I could bring skills to. Personally, I think the equality champion role makes use of my own background and skills really well and has a departmental sweep, and it is also about trying to deliver on one of the programme for government objectives, which is the implementation of equality in practice.
So you'd like to stay with that one, obviously?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's your mission almost.
I'm loving it, and I think I can contribute. I think it's all very well being in a certain role, but you should ideally. It's better to be in roles where you really have got something you can bring.
How often do you get to your feet and say things and put your point of view over? How do you feel it's going on that front?
I think pretty well. I don't think there's been a Tynwald when I haven't contributed. I found myself sometimes, there are things that I'm quite passionate about and interested in. So we've had some interesting, really moving debates. You probably remember Tim Baker's motion on accommodation for vulnerable, looked after young people when they turn 18. And Rob Callister spoke extremely movingly in that. Now, that happens to be one of my interests and passions as well. So where there are topics that I'm interested in, absolutely, I will contribute. But increasingly in the chamber, sometimes you're listening to a discussion you weren't intending to join in, but you think, actually, I'd like to make this point.
Do you see yourself putting anything forward? I mean, is that in your... coming up the next year or so, do you want to put some legislation up there?
I don't know about legislation. I mean, certainly as chair of the Justice Committee laid its first report in December. So in February, we will debate our recommendations. So I, at the moment, feel like I have a number of roles that I already have through which things are being driven forward. For example, I'm also on the Whistleblowing Select Committee, another really interesting area and something that I have background knowledge and skills around. It is hugely interesting. Can people whistleblow here? Or is there more to be done? They can. I think there's more to be done. I think, we're still, I shouldn't preempt the committee's reporting in due course, but certainly the evidence that we're hearing and some of the issues, this isn't an easy area anywhere. Actually, the Isle of Man isn't unique. It's too small, isn't it? Well, I think that might be part of our particular challenge. But I think in any area where you work, once you're talking about highlighting practices in your workplace, you still know your colleagues very, very well, and that can still be a really difficult thing to do. Okay, now let's talk about the expenses and salaries, because we're asking everyone that, but this is the ongoing thing. It's clearly you're one of the lower paid ones because you're not on anything, but do you see yourself getting paid the right amount, and what do you think about those expenses now that you're in and settled? Yeah, my view on expenses is the way it is packaged at the moment. I understand all the historical reasons for that. It is an anomaly that what happens is we get an allowance that isn't subject to tax. And scrutiny, because you can do what you want with it. Yeah, and again, there are pros and cons about how it's packaged, absolutely, because the argument for giving it as a lump sum as opposed to everybody filling in forms all the time is the administrative cost that goes with everybody filling in forms all of the time. So there are pros and cons, and you might say, is it more transparent just to be clear and say this is the sum, the sorts of things it's used for are, for example. Or this is your wages and you just sort everything out yourself. Absolutely. So you could do that as well. So I think, the Emoluments Committee of Tynwald is certainly looking at it, and I think there is absolutely broad agreement. Are you paid enough then? Well, my view is it's difficult, isn't it? Because I never took this on because of the money. There is definitely a public service element to being in Tynwald. Having said that, you definitely want to attract people who will give it all due attention and focus and not feel the need to spend a lot of time doing other things to make their income. This is your full-time commitment, is it? This is my absolutely full-time commitment. You had to give up some things, didn't you? I was unsure whether I would be able to carry on doing consultancy work. I haven't done any since I've been in Legislative Council. I think what's important is to encourage a bit on the executive parliamentary piece. The fact that there is no acknowledgement whatsoever at the moment of people doing scrutiny roles in terms of the pay, is that going to put people off opting for the scrutiny path as opposed to the executive path? Now, if it is, I would say that's a problem. And the other problem is we're not subject to our equality law in the same way that people who work in what I'm going to call more normal jobs with employer-employee relationships are. But, is there a question about... I feel I work as hard as any of my colleagues, albeit I have a number of roles that are not within a department. On an equal pay basis, I'm certainly paid below them. Now, I'm not complaining about that, but you have to ask the question, do we acknowledge all of the roles and contributions that Tynwald members make in the current... Right. So, should educators be paid more than MLCs? I mean, what do you think about that one? I think that, again, there's an interesting question there for me about whether there should be any acknowledgement of their probably increased constituency workload. So one of the things that I have noticed is that the longer you're in role and the particular jobs you do, of course, everybody in Tynwald gets approached by individuals. Everybody does. I certainly have got several individual matters running at the moment that I am particularly interested in. I'm not sure that my individual workload, if you want to call it that, is at the same regular pace and size as the MHKs, because obviously MHKs are very, very visible to their constituents and are much more likely to be approached regularly. So is there a case for saying, well, what proportion of your workload, if you're an MHK, is around that constituency work? And should there be an element of acknowledgement of that in the rounded pay?
So yes or no?
I think you could say yes, but what gets very, very difficult then is how much that should be.
Anyway, to finish with, you enjoying yourself? You want to do it again?
Definitely. Well, some years off, isn't it?
True,
I think there's a question always about, are you still going to be the right person to contribute? So I think you have to be very honest with yourself at that point. What is it you will be contributing? And
but you're enjoying doing it?
Oh yes, absolutely.